The wind howled through the pine trees like a wounded animal, bending their ancient branches until Sarah Jones thought they might snap. She stood on the porch of her modest cabin, her calloused hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee that had long gone cold. At 27, she'd spent the last 5 years in these Colorado mountains, choosing solitude over the chaos of Denver's corporate world she'd left behind. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah had come here after her father died, inheriting his 40-acre property nestled in a remote valley where cell service was a myth and the nearest neighbor was 8 miles away. She traded her marketing career and designer heels for flannel shirts and work boots, learning to chop wood, fix generators, and track wildlife. Most people thought she was crazy. Her mother certainly did, calling every Sunday to ask when she'd come to her senses. But Sarah had found something in these mountains that the city never offered: peace. Or at least she had until tonight. The storm had rolled in fast, turning the October sky from pale blue to bruised purple in less than an hour. Weather reports on her crackling radio warned of the worst early snowstorm in decades. Sarah had spent the afternoon securing her small barn, stacking firewood closer to the cabin, and filling every container she owned with water. She was prepared for isolation. That was nothing new. What she wasn't prepared for was the sound that cut through the storm's rage around midnight. It started as a distant rumbling, different from thunder. Sarah sat up in bed, her heart suddenly racing. The rumbling grew louder, accompanied by high-pitched whinnying that made her blood run cold. Horses, multiple horses, and they were in distress. She threw on her heavy coat and boots, grabbed her high-powered flashlight, and stepped into the blizzard. Snow stung her face like tiny needles, and the wind nearly knocked her off balance. Through the swirling white, she could barely see 10 feet ahead, but she followed the sounds, her flashlight beam cutting through the chaos. Then she saw them. 12 horses burst through the tree line, their eyes wide with terror, nostrils flaring as they struggled through the deepening snow. They were magnificent animals, quarter horses, bays, chestnuts, and a stunning black stallion leading the group. But they were also panicked and exhausted, their coats lathered with sweat despite the freezing temperature. Behind them, Sarah caught sight of what they were fleeing from, a wall of fire moving through the forest despite the snow. A lightning strike must have hit something flammable, and the blaze was spreading with terrifying speed, driven by the powerful winds. "Come on!" Sarah shouted, knowing the horses couldn't understand her words, but hoping they'd follow her tone. She ran toward her barn, throwing open the large doors. The building wasn't big enough for 12 horses, but it was better than leaving them to die in the storm or burn in the approaching fire. The black stallion paused, his intelligent eyes meeting hers for a moment. Then with a decisive snort, he turned and herded the other horses toward the barn. Sarah watched in amazement as he moved with purpose, nipping at the stragglers, guiding them to safety like a seasoned shepherd. Once the last horse was inside, Sarah slammed the doors shut and leaned against them, her chest heaving. The barn was packed, horses pressed against each other, but they were alive and out of immediate danger. She'd worry about the fire next. Racing back to her cabin through knee-deep snow, Sarah grabbed her radio and tried every emergency channel. Static greeted her attempts. The storm had knocked out communications. She was on her own, with 12 terrified horses and a wildfire approaching her property. Sarah spent the next 2 hours in a desperate battle. Using her pickup truck, she created a firebreak by clearing brush and debris from around her buildings. The snow was helping. The fire was moving slower than it would have in dry conditions, but it was still coming. She soaked the barn's exterior with her garden hose until the water pressure failed, then hauled bucket after bucket from her well. By dawn, the fire had burned itself out about 100 yards from her property line, stopped by a combination of the snow, a rocky outcropping, and Sarah's firebreak. She stood in the grey morning light, covered in ash and soot, her muscles screaming with exhaustion, and realized she'd just saved her home and 12 horses that didn't belong to her. As the adrenaline faded, questions flooded her mind. Where had these horses come from? They were too well groomed to be wild mustangs. Someone owned them, cared for them, but who? And why were they running loose in a mountain storm? Sarah trudged to the barn, her body moving on autopilot. When she opened the doors, the horses had calmed considerably. They looked at her with a mixture of exhaustion and something else. Gratitude, maybe? The black stallion stepped forward, lowering his massive head until his nose nearly touched her shoulder. She reached up and stroked his neck, feeling the strong muscles beneath the sweat-soaked coat. "Who do you belong to, boy?" she whispered. The stallion snorted softly, and that's when Sarah noticed it, a leather pouch secured to his halter, partially hidden by his thick mane. Her cold fingers fumbled with the buckle until she freed it. The pouch was old, weathered but well made. Inside was a folded piece of paper, protected by a plastic sleeve. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened it, though whether from cold or anticipation she couldn't say. What she read made her forget about her exhaustion, her cold-soaked clothes, and the near disaster of the night. It was a map, hand-drawn but detailed, showing the mountain range she called home, and marked with a red X, less than 3 miles from her cabin, were the words that would change her life forever. Fortune's End, the lost mine of Catherine Blackwood. Sarah stood in her barn, staring at the map, as weak morning light filtered through gaps in the wooden walls. The horses had settled, some lying down, others munching on the hay she'd scattered. The black stallion remained near her, his presence oddly comforting as her mind raced. Catherine Blackwood. The name resonated with something buried in Sarah's memory. A story her father had told her once, years ago, dismissed as local folklore. She closed her eyes, trying to recall the details. Her father had been fascinated by Colorado mining history, spending weekends exploring abandoned sites and reading old newspapers in library archives. He'd told her about dozens of prospectors and their fortunes, but Catherine Blackwood's story had been different, darker, more mysterious. Sarah needed to remember. She secured the map in her coat pocket, gave the horses one last check, and trudged through the snow to her cabin. Inside, she started a fire in the wood stove and put on a kettle. Her body was demanding sleep, but her mind wouldn't allow it. Not yet. She climbed the ladder to her loft, where cardboard boxes were stacked against the far wall, her father's things. She'd brought them from his Denver house after he died, but had never found the courage to go through them. Now, she pulled down box after box, searching for his research materials. 2 hours later, covered in dust and surrounded by manila folders, old maps and leather-bound journals, Sarah found it. A spiral notebook with her father's meticulous handwriting dated from 15 years ago. The tab read, Blackwood Mystery. Sarah made fresh coffee and began to read. Catherine Blackwood had arrived in Colorado in 1881, which was unusual enough, a woman traveling alone during the height of the mining boom. But Catherine wasn't just any woman. According to her father's notes, compiled from various historical sources, she'd been a geologist from Boston, educated at a time when women were rarely admitted to universities. She'd inherited a small fortune from her father and used it to fund her own prospecting expedition. The mining camps were rough, dangerous places, especially for women. But Catherine had been tough, smart, and determined. She'd hired a small crew of men who respected her knowledge, and within 6 months she'd located a silver vein that would have made her one of the wealthiest women in America. Would have, because that's where the story took its dark turn. According to newspapers from 1882, Catherine's entire crew, 5 men, had been found dead at the mine site, killed in what authorities called a tragic accident involving a cavern collapse. But there were whispers, her father's notes indicated, whispers that the men had fought among themselves over the silver, that Catherine had disappeared before authorities arrived, that the mine's location died with her. Some claimed Catherine had killed her crew and fled with samples of the ore. Others said she'd been murdered too, her body hidden where it would never be found. A few believed she'd caused the collapse deliberately, sealing the mine to protect it from those who would exploit it, then vanished into the mountains to live out her days in secret. The mine was never found. Search parties combed the mountains for months, but discovered nothing. Eventually, Fortune's End, the name Catherine had given her claim, became legend, the kind of story old-timers told in bars to wide-eyed tourists. Sarah's father had been convinced there was truth beneath the legend. His notes detailed geographical surveys, geological assessments, and interview fragments from descendants of the original search parties. He'd narrowed the possible location to a 10-square-mile area in the San Juan Mountains, the same area where Sarah now lived. She cross-referenced the map from the stallion's pouch with her father's research. The landmarks matched: specific peaks, a peculiar rock formation, a valley that locals called Echo Basin. Her father had gotten close, so close, but he'd never found definitive proof. Who had made this map? And how did it end up attached to a horse, fleeing through a mountain storm? Sarah's exhaustion was finally overwhelming her curiosity. She needed sleep, but first she had to take care of the horses. They'd need food, water, and medical attention. Some had minor cuts and scrapes from their desperate flight through the forest. As she worked in the barn, checking each animal, she noticed something else. The horses weren't just well-groomed, they were trained to an exceptional level. They responded to voice commands, stood calmly for her examination, and showed none of the skittishness she'd expect from traumatized animals. The black stallion in particular was remarkable. He watched her with an intelligence that was almost unnerving, and twice he'd moved to block her path when she was about to step on a loose board that could have caused injury. It was as if he understood not just her intentions, but the potential consequences of actions. "Who trained you?" she asked, running her hands along his powerful shoulders, checking for injuries. "And what were you doing out in that storm?" The stallion nickered softly, turning his head to look directly at her. Around his neck, beneath the halter, Sarah noticed a faint scar, a brand partially obscured by his winter coat. She carefully parted the hair to examine it more closely. It wasn't a ranch brand. It was a symbol, a circle with a mountain peak inside it, and beneath that initials, MB. Sarah's breath caught. MB. Could it be related to Catherine Blackwood? No, that was impossible. That would be over 140 years ago. But the coincidence was striking. She photographed the brand with her old digital camera, one of the few pieces of technology she'd kept when moving to the mountains, and made a mental note to research it once her phone and internet were working again. For now, she needed to focus on immediate concerns. The horses required proper shelter for more than a few days. Her barn wasn't equipped for this many animals long term. She'd need to contact the authorities, try to find the horses' owners, and figure out her next steps. But as Sarah finally collapsed into bed, the map and her father's notebook on the table beside her, she couldn't shake the feeling that these horses hadn't ended up at her cabin by accident. The timing, the location, the map, it was all too perfect, too purposeful. The last thought she had before sleep claimed her was of the black stallion's intelligent eyes and the way he'd guided the other horses to safety. Not like an animal acting on instinct, but like someone following a plan. When she woke 6 hours later, the storm had passed, leaving her world buried under 2 feet of pristine snow. The sun reflected off the white landscape with blinding intensity, and the mountain air was so clear and cold it hurt to breathe. Sarah dressed quickly and went to check on the horses. They were all standing, alert and watching the barn door, as if they'd been waiting for her. The black stallion was at the front of the group, and when Sarah entered, he whinnied, a sound that seemed almost like a greeting or, impossibly, a summons. That's when she noticed the barn door. She'd secured it last night, but now it stood slightly ajar. Not much, just a few inches, as if something had been testing it, trying to open it from the inside. Her pulse quickened as she examined the door more closely. There, in the soft wood of the frame, were fresh marks, not from hooves or random damage, but deliberate scratches that formed a pattern. Sarah traced them with her finger, her mind refusing to accept what her eyes were seeing. The marks formed an arrow, pointing west, toward the location marked on the map as Fortune's End. Sarah spent the next 2 days trying to convince herself she was seeing patterns where none existed. That exhaustion and her father's old stories were making her imagine impossible things. But the evidence kept mounting. The horses refused to leave. She'd opened the barn doors, expecting them to wander off or at least explore, but they stayed close to the buildings, always returning to the barn as if it were their assigned post. The black stallion, whom she'd started calling Midnight for lack of a better name, seemed to be keeping guard, his attention constantly drawn westward toward the mountains. On the second morning, Sarah's radio crackled to life. The storm had passed, and communication was restored. She immediately contacted the local sheriff's office in Ridgeway, the nearest town, to report the horses. 12 horses, you said? Deputy Martinez sounded skeptical. Mom, we haven't had any reports of missing animals. That's a pretty significant loss. Someone would have called it in. They're not wild, Sarah insisted. They're trained, well-cared-for animals. Someone owns them. I'll put out the word, Martinez promised. Can you describe them? Any identifying marks? Sarah provided according to newspapers from 1882. Catherine's entire crew, 5 men, had been found dead at the mine site, killed in what authorities called a tragic accident involving a cavern collapse. But there were whispers, her father's notes indicated. Whispers that the men had fought among themselves over the silver, that Catherine had disappeared before authorities arrived, that the mine's location died with her. End of the line. That's odd, Martinez said slowly. Can you describe that brand again? Sarah did. Ma'am, I'm going to need to send someone up there. Don't let those horses leave your property. Why? Do you know who they belong to? Another pause. Maybe, but if I'm right, this situation is a lot more complicated than lost livestock. Someone will be there tomorrow morning, weather permitting. The call ended, leaving Sarah with more questions than answers. She looked at Midnight, who stood in the barn doorway, his dark coat gleaming in the sunlight. What have you gotten me into? She asked. The stallion tossed his head, then did something that made Sarah's skin prickle. He walked deliberately to the snow-covered ground, lowered his head, and began pawing at the snow in a specific pattern. Not random movements, purposeful, careful strokes. Sarah watched, transfixed, as Midnight cleared away the snow to reveal the frozen earth beneath. Then he stopped and looked at her expectantly. She approached slowly. In the cleared patch, Midnight had drawn 3 distinct lines with his hooves, lines that intersected to form another arrow, again pointing west. That's impossible, Sarah whispered. Horses can't. But he had. She'd watched him do it. Sarah ran back to her cabin, her heart pounding. She pulled out the map and her father's research, spreading everything across her kitchen table. The location marked as Fortune's End was approximately 3 miles west, up a steep mountain trail that would be treacherous in current conditions. 3 miles. She could make it in a day if she started at dawn, even with the snow. But why would she? Based on a map of questionable origin and a horse that seemed to be trying to communicate? Yet even as she questioned it, Sarah was already making preparations. She packed supplies, water, food, warm clothes, climbing rope, a first aid kit, and her father's old mining equipment, including a rock hammer and sample bags. She charged her satellite phone, checked her GPS unit, and studied topographical maps of the area. If she was going to do this, and apparently she was, she'd do it properly. That night, Sarah barely slept. She kept thinking about her father, about the years he'd spent searching for Catherine Blackwood's lost mine. He died of a heart attack, sudden and unexpected, at only 58. Too young, too sudden. She'd always wondered if the stress of his obsession had contributed to it. Now here she was, about to follow in his footsteps, chasing the same legend. Was she honoring his memory, or falling into the same obsession that might have killed him? At 5 a.m., Sarah gave up on sleep. She dressed in layers, ate a protein-heavy breakfast, and went to the barn. All 12 horses were awake and alert, as if they'd been waiting. Midnight stepped forward immediately. I don't suppose you're going to let me do this alone, Sarah said. The stallion nickered and moved toward the barn door. Sarah had experience with horses. Her father had kept two when she was growing up, but she hadn't ridden in years. Still, Midnight stood perfectly still as she fashioned a makeshift bridle from rope and threw a blanket over his back for padding. She didn't have a saddle that would fit his large frame, but he seemed willing to carry her regardless. The other horses followed as they set out, creating a strange procession through the snow-covered forest. Sarah had expected to lead them, but Midnight seemed to know exactly where he was going. He picked his way up the mountain with sure-footed confidence, choosing paths that avoided the deepest snow and most dangerous terrain. As they climbed higher, the forest changed. Ponderosa pines gave way to Douglas firs and aspens, their bare branches like skeletal fingers against the bright blue sky. The air grew thinner, making Sarah's breathing labored, but Midnight never faltered. Around noon, they reached a plateau that offered a stunning view of the valley below. Sarah could see her cabin, a tiny structure dwarfed by the vast wilderness. She'd never been this far up the mountain, despite 5 years of living here. The terrain beyond was unfamiliar. Midnight paused, allowing Sarah to dismount and check her GPS. According to the map, Fortune's End should be another mile ahead, in a narrow canyon that cut between 2 peaks. Her father's notes mentioned this canyon. He'd called it Serpent's Path because of the way it twisted through the rock. They continued on foot, with Sarah leading Midnight and the other horses following. The canyon entrance was almost hidden, obscured by fallen boulders and dense vegetation that had died back in the winter. Sarah had to squeeze between rocks, pulling Midnight through spaces that seemed too narrow for his broad chest, but the stallion trusted her, following without hesitation. Inside the canyon, the world changed. The high walls blocked much of the sunlight, creating a twilight environment even at midday. The temperature dropped noticeably, and sound behaved strangely, echoing and distorting. Sarah understood why locals called it Echo Basin. Halfway through the canyon, Midnight stopped abruptly. His ears went back and he snorted nervously. The other horses crowded together, showing the first real signs of fear since the night they'd arrived. "What is it, boy?" Sarah whispered, her hand instinctively moving to the knife on her belt. Then she heard it, a sound like rocks falling, coming from somewhere ahead. But there was a rhythm to it, a pattern that didn't match natural rockfall. Someone was in the canyon. Someone was digging! Sarah's mind raced. Deputy Martinez was supposed to send someone tomorrow, not today. And no one else knew she was here. She hadn't told anyone about the map or her plans. She tied Midnight to a stunted tree and moved forward on foot, staying close to the canyon wall, using boulders for cover. The sound grew louder, definitely metal striking stone. Around a sharp bend, Sarah finally saw the source. 3 people were working at the canyon's end, where the walls came together in a natural cul-de-sac. They had excavation equipment, shovels, pickaxes, and what looked like a portable drill. A tent was set up nearby, suggesting they'd been there for days. Sarah recognized the figure supervising the work, a tall, silver-haired woman in expensive outdoor gear. Margaret Blackwood, owner of Blackwood Enterprises, one of Colorado's largest mining conglomerates. Sarah had seen her in the news, always fighting environmental regulations, always pushing for more mining access in protected areas. Margaret Blackwood, MB, the same initials as the brand on Midnight's neck. Sarah's breath caught as the pieces fell into place. These weren't lost horses, they were stolen. And Fortune's End wasn't just legend. It was real, and Margaret Blackwood had been searching for it, had perhaps already found it. As Sarah watched from hiding, Margaret pulled out what looked like a map, different from the one Sarah carried but clearly depicting the same area. She shouted orders to her workers, directing them to dig in a specific spot near the base of the northern wall. One of the workers' pickaxes struck something that rang with a metallic sound. They all stopped, excitement evident in their movements. Margaret rushed forward, dropping to her knees in the dirt. Sarah needed to get closer to see what they'd found, but movement would expose her. She was debating her options when she felt hot breath on her neck. She nearly screamed but managed to stifle it. Midnight had somehow untied himself and followed her. The other horses were right behind him, and as Sarah watched in horror, The black stallion lifted his head and let out a trumpeting whinny that echoed through the canyon like a battle cry. Margaret Blackwood's head snapped up, her eyes locking onto Sarah's position. "You!" Margaret shouted, recognition flashing across her face. "How did you— Those are my horses. Arrest her! She's a thief!" Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Two of the workers started moving towards Sarah, and she realized they weren't just laborers, they moved with the practiced efficiency of security personnel or worse. Sarah had seconds to make a decision. Run back the way she came, where the narrow canyon would make her an easy target, or go forward, toward the dig site where she was outnumbered 3-1. Midnight made the decision for her. The stallion charged past her, heading directly toward Margaret Blackwood, his hooves striking sparks on the stone. The other 11 horses followed, creating a thundering stampede in the confined space. Margaret and her people scattered, diving for cover as 12 horses bore down on them. Sarah used the chaos to sprint forward, toward the spot where they'd been digging. She needed to see what they'd found, needed to understand why all of this was happening. She reached the excavation site and looked down. What she saw made her forget about Margaret, the horses, and her own danger. They'd uncovered a door, a metal door set into the mountain itself, ornately decorated with engravings of mountains and horses, and beneath it a plaque bearing an inscription in elegant script, "Fortune's End, Estes 1881, C.E.B. To those who seek not gold but truth, these doors shall open. To those who seek only wealth, these doors shall remain forever sealed." Catherine Elizabeth Blackwood. This was her mine, and she'd built something far more sophisticated than a simple silver operation. This was designed, intentional, and protected. Sarah reached out to touch the door, but before her fingers made contact, Margaret Blackwood's voice cut through the air. "Step away from that door, Miss Jones. I know who you are. Robert Jones's daughter. Your father spent 20 years searching for this mine, and now you just stumble upon it." "I don't think so. You're working with someone. Who gave you that map?" Sarah turned slowly. Margaret was back on her feet, flanked by her 2 security people. One of them had his hand near his belt, where Sarah could see the outline of a holstered weapon. "I don't know what you're talking about," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Those horses showed up at my cabin during the storm. I was just trying to help them." "My horses," Margaret corrected coldly, "which were stolen from my private stable 3 nights ago, along with certain documents, including a map that I've spent millions of dollars and 15 years creating." She took a step closer. "The question is, Miss Jones, did you steal them yourself, or are you working for someone else? Someone who knew about your father's research and decided to use you?" Sarah's mind was reeling. She hadn't stolen anything. The horses had come to her, but Margaret clearly believed otherwise. And Sarah was alone in a remote canyon with people who had both the means and the motive to make her disappear. The door behind her suddenly felt important in a way she couldn't explain. Catherine Blackwood had left a message, "To those who seek not gold, but truth." Sarah wasn't here for wealth. She was here for answers about her father, about why he'd spent so many years chasing this legend. "I'm seeking truth," Sarah said quietly, then louder. "I'm seeking truth, not gold." The moment the words left her lips, the door shuddered. Ancient mechanisms groaned to life, sounds of metal scraping against stone, gears turning somewhere deep within the mountain. The door began to open, revealing darkness beyond. Margaret's eyes widened with greedy excitement. "Finally!" After all these years, but when she tried to approach the door, nothing happened. She took another step, reaching toward the entrance, and an invisible force seemed to push her back. She stumbled, shock replacing her triumph. "What is this?" she demanded. What kind of trick? Sarah felt it too, but differently. Not a pushing force, but a pulling one, like a gentle invitation. The door was open for her, only for her. Midnight appeared at her side, pressing his shoulder against her leg. When she looked down at him, She could have sworn the stallion nodded, as if urging her forward. "I don't understand," Sarah breathed, but she didn't have time to figure it out. Margaret was screaming orders to her security team, and they were pulling out serious equipment, not just handguns, but rifles. These people weren't playing games, and Sarah was now standing between them and what they believed was a fortune in silver. With no other choice, Sarah stepped through the door into Catherine Blackwood's lost mine. Midnight followed immediately, and to Sarah's surprise, the other 11 horses crowded through after them. The moment the last horse crossed the threshold, the door began to close, grinding shut with the weight of over a century behind it. Sarah heard Margaret screaming, heard the sound of metal tools striking the door, but it sealed completely, leaving Sarah and the horses in total darkness. For a moment, silence reigned. Then one by one, lights began to flicker on, electric lights, impossible for 1881 but somehow real. They illuminated a tunnel stretching deep into the mountain, carved with precision that must have taken years of work. And on the wall, in the same elegant script as the door's plaque, new words glowed with soft light. "Welcome, Sarah Jones, daughter of Robert. I've been waiting for you." Sarah stood frozen in the tunnel, her heart hammering against her ribs as she stared at the glowing words. The lights, electric lights, cast dancing shadows on the carved stone walls, creating an atmosphere that felt both ancient and impossibly modern. "This can't be real," she whispered, but her voice echoed back to her, confirming the solid reality of where she stood. Midnight nudged her shoulder gently, and the contact broke through her shock. She turned to look at the 12 horses crowded in the tunnel behind her, their eyes reflecting the strange light. They were calm now, no longer showing the panic from the storm or even the nervousness from the canyon. It was as if they'd come home. Sarah approached the glowing message, her hand trembling as she reached toward it. The moment her fingers touched the wall, the light shifted, and new words appeared. "If you're reading this, you've passed the first test. You seek truth over wealth. You've shown kindness to creatures in need. And you carry Robert's blood, a man who understood that some treasures are not meant to be measured in dollars." Sarah's throat tightened at the mention of her father. "How?" she asked the empty tunnel. "How could you know about him? You died over 100 years ago." The wall shimmered again, and more text appeared as if responding to her question. "I didn't die, Sarah. I chose to disappear. And I've been watching, waiting for someone worthy to inherit what I've protected." Your father came close. He understood the truth, that fortune's end was never about the silver. But his time wasn't right. "You are what I've been waiting for." The words faded, replaced by an arrow of light pointing deeper into the tunnel. Sarah looked at Midnight, who was already moving forward, following the light. The other horses fell into formation behind him, and Sarah found herself pulled along by their certainty. As they walked, the tunnel revealed its secrets. The walls were covered with intricate carvings, depicting scenes from Catherine Blackwood's life, her arrival in Colorado, her geological surveys, her discovery of the silver vein. But there were other images too, more surprising. Catherine surrounded by horses. Catherine with indigenous people who appeared to be teaching her. Catherine alone in laboratories filled with equipment that seemed far too advanced for the 1880s. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 15 minutes, the tunnel opened into a vast cavern. Sarah gasped. The space was enormous, easily the size of a cathedral, with a domed ceiling that sparkled with what looked like stars. Natural light filtered down through cleverly designed shafts that were invisible from above, illuminating the cavern with a soft, golden glow. But it wasn't the architecture that made Sarah's breath catch. It was what filled the space. It was a laboratory, a library, and a living space, all combined into one impossible underground complex. Shelves carved into the rock walls held thousands of books, journals, and what appeared to be scientific equipment. There were areas set up for chemistry, mineralogy, engineering, and subjects Sarah couldn't even identify. In the center of the cavern stood a massive table covered with maps, drawings, and devices that looked like they belonged in a museum of future technology, not a 19th century mine. And everywhere, on every surface, wall, and ceiling, were more carvings of horses. "Welcome to my true work," a voice said, and Sarah spun around looking for the speaker. A holographic image flickered to life near the central table. It showed a woman in her 40s, dressed in practical Victorian-era clothing, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her eyes, even in projection, were sharp with intelligence and something else, a deep, almost overwhelming sadness. "Catherine Blackwood, if you're seeing this," the projection continued, "then the Guardians have chosen you, and the door has opened. I've recorded this message to explain what you've inherited and what you must now protect." Catherine's image moved, gesturing toward the cavern around her. "I came to Colorado seeking silver, yes, but I found something far more valuable. In these mountains, in a cave system I discovered while surveying, I found evidence of a civilization that predated any known human settlement in this region. They left behind technology, knowledge, and something even more precious, a connection to the consciousness of the earth itself." Sarah listened, her mind struggling to process what she was hearing. This was impossible, crazy, the ravings of someone who'd spent too long alone in the mountains. And yet, she was standing in a cavern filled with things that shouldn't exist, watching a recording that shouldn't be possible. Catherine's projection continued. "The indigenous people I befriended, those who still remembered the old stories, told me that this place was sacred. They called it the heart of the mountain, and they said that those who were pure of heart could learn to communicate with the spirit of the land itself, could draw upon knowledge that transcended time and space." The projection changed, showing images of the cave system, of strange symbols and artifacts that looked nothing like anything Sarah had seen in history books. "I spent years studying what I found here," Catherine said. "I learned to access knowledge from what I can only describe as a collective consciousness, information left behind by the ancient ones who built this place. That's how I was able to create technology far beyond my time. That's how I knew the silver vein existed before I ever dug. That's how I've been able to watch, even after my supposed death, waiting for the right person to inherit this responsibility." Sarah found her voice. "Why me? Why my father? What makes us special?" The projection seemed to look directly at her, though Sarah knew it was impossible. "Your ancestor, Sarah, was one of the indigenous people who helped me. Your great-great-great-grandmother was a medicine woman of the Ute people. Her name was Morning Star, and she taught me the old ways, helped me understand how to listen to the mountain's voice. Your father carried that blood, that connection, even if he didn't know it. And you carry it too." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her father had never mentioned indigenous ancestry. Her family history, as she knew it, was Irish and German, immigrants who'd come to America in the 1800s. But looking at the projection, seeing the certainty in Catherine's eyes, Sarah felt a deep recognition. It explained things she'd never questioned. Her father's connection to the mountains, her own strange communion with nature, the way she'd always felt more at home in the wilderness than in civilization. "The men who worked for me," Catherine continued, her expression darkening, "they learned about what I'd found. They wanted to exploit it, to sell the technology, to mine the mountain for profit without understanding the damage they could cause. I tried to reason with them, but greed is a powerful force. They attacked me, tried to take my journals and research by force." The projection showed a new scene. 5 men arguing with Catherine, their faces twisted with avarice. "I had to protect the heart. I triggered the cave-in that supposedly killed us all. But I survived, hidden in passages they never knew existed. I let the world believe I was dead, and I've remained here ever since, dedicating my life to studying and protecting what I found." Sarah tried to reconcile this with the timeline. "But that was 1882. You'd have been over 180 years old by now." Catherine's projection smiled sadly. "The heart has properties that defy conventional understanding. Time moves differently here. The consciousness I've touched, the knowledge I've gained, it sustains in ways I still don't fully comprehend. I lived here for decades, Sarah. I watched the 20th century unfold through the mountain's eyes, saw humanity make the same mistakes over and over, choosing greed over wisdom. The projection flickered, becoming less stable. But even with the heart's protection, I was still mortal. I died in 1955, at the age of 93, though I appeared much younger. Before I passed, I set up the Guardians. 12 horses, descendants of the ones I'd trained, each generation passing knowledge to the next through methods I learned from the ancient ones. They've been watching, waiting for someone worthy to claim this inheritance. Sarah looked at Midnight, understanding flooding through her. They're not just horses. No, Catherine confirmed. They're caretakers, protectors, teachers. They carry within them a fragment of the consciousness I learned to access. They knew your father was close to finding this place, but his time wasn't right. He was too obsessed with the finding, not with the understanding. You, Sarah, you left everything behind seeking peace, not fortune. You saved the Guardians without expecting reward. You passed the tests without even knowing you were being tested. The projection was fading now, becoming transparent. I'm sorry I can't be here to guide you personally, but the heart will teach you as it taught me. The Guardians will help you, and my journals, all my research, everything I learned, it's yours now. Use it wisely, Sarah Jones. Protect it from those like Margaret Blackwood, who would destroy this place for profit. Wait, Sarah called out as the projection began to disappear. What am I supposed to do? How do I listen? Catherine whispered, her voice barely audible. The mountain will teach you how to listen. Trust the Guardians. And remember, you're not alone. You never were. The projection vanished completely, leaving Sarah standing in the cavern, surrounded by impossible knowledge and 12 horses who were apparently far more than they seemed. Midnight approached her, his dark eyes meeting hers with that unnerving intelligence. This time, Sarah didn't question what she was seeing. She reached out and placed her hand on his neck, and the moment she made contact, something extraordinary happened. Images flooded her mind, not words but pure understanding. She saw the mountain as the Guardians saw it, felt the pulse of the ancient consciousness Catherine had described, glimpsed fragments of knowledge accumulated over millennia. It was overwhelming, beautiful, and terrifying all at once. When the connection broke, Sarah was on her knees, tears streaming down her face. She understood now. She understood everything. Catherine Blackwood hadn't found a silver mine. She'd found something infinitely more valuable, a repository of knowledge, a connection to something vast and ancient, a way to access understanding that could change everything humanity thought it knew about history, technology, and consciousness itself. And now Sarah was its guardian. She stood slowly, her legs shaking, and looked around the cavern with new eyes. She could see now what she'd missed before. The patterns in the stone, the way the light fell, the subtle energy that pulsed through everything. The heart of the mountain was alive, in a way that defied conventional biology, but was undeniably real. Sarah walked to the central table and picked up one of Catherine's journals, opening it to a random page. The handwriting was neat and precise, documenting experiments with crystal resonance and energy patterns. Another journal detailed conversations with the indigenous elders, learning about vision quests and the old ceremonies. A third contained architectural drawings for underground structures that must still exist somewhere in this vast cave system. There were hundreds of journals. It would take years to read them all, to understand everything Catherine had learned. A noise from the tunnel entrance made Sarah turn. The sound of metal striking stone. Margaret Blackwood and her team were still trying to break through the door. Sarah had forgotten about them in the revelation of the cavern, but they hadn't forgotten about her. "What do I do?" Sarah asked aloud, looking at Midnight. "They're not going to give up. Margaret Blackwood has resources, money, influence. How am I supposed to protect this place from her?" The Midnight walked to one of the carved walls and pressed his nose against a specific symbol. A section of the wall slid aside, revealing a smaller chamber. Sarah approached cautiously and peered inside. It was an armory of sorts, but not weapons in the traditional sense. There were crystals of various sizes and colors, each one labeled in Catherine's handwriting with descriptions of their properties. amplifies consciousness connection, creates protective barriers, generates confusion in those with ill intent, preserves and protects organic matter. And at the center of the chamber, in a case made of the same strange metal as the door, lay a larger crystal, one that seemed to contain its own light source, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. The label read, "The heart's core, use only in greatest need, will protect the mountain and reveal truth to all who witness. Once activated, cannot be undone. Choose wisely." Sarah reached for the crystal, then hesitated. Catherine's warning was clear. This was a last resort, something that would permanently change things. But what choice did she have? Margaret would keep trying to break in, would eventually succeed through sheer persistence and resources. And once she did, she'd destroy everything in her quest for profit. Unless Sarah could prove that Fortune's End was more than legend, that it contained something worth preserving beyond monetary value, she lifted the heart's core from its case. It was surprisingly light, warm to the touch, and the moment her fingers closed around it, she felt the consciousness of the mountain surging through her more powerfully than before. She saw Catherine's entire life in an instant, her struggles, her discoveries, her sacrifices. She felt the presence of Morning Star, Sarah's own ancestor, and understood the connection that bound her to this place. And she knew what she had to do. Sarah walked back to the main tunnel, the heart's core cradled in her hands, Midnight and the other guardians following her. When she reached the sealed door, she could hear Margaret shouting orders, heard the whine of power tools trying to cut through the ancient metal. "I'm sorry, Catherine," Sarah whispered, "but I don't think I can keep this secret. Not from her, not from the world. We need to change the story." She placed her hand on the door, and with barely a thought, it began to open. The mechanisms responded to her now as they had to Catherine, recognizing her as the new keeper of the heart. Margaret Blackwood and her team stumbled back as the door swung wide. They were covered in sweat and rock dust, their expensive equipment having barely scratched the surface of the door. Margaret's eyes widened when she saw Sarah standing there, backlit by the cavern's golden glow, holding a crystal that pulsed with inner light. "Ms. Blackwood," Sarah said calmly, "I think it's time we had a conversation about your family history, about what your great-great-great-aunt Catherine really found in these mountains, and about why you're going to help me protect it instead of destroy it." Margaret's face went through a series of expressions: shock, confusion, greed, and finally something that might have been fear. "How do you know about Catherine?" "That's private family history, because she left me everything," Sarah interrupted, "including the truth about why she disappeared, what she was really protecting, and why it's worth more than all the silver in Colorado." Sarah raised the heart's core, and it began to glow brighter, filling the canyon with light. The temperature rose, not uncomfortably, but noticeably, and in that light, everyone present, Margaret, her security team, even Sarah herself, experienced what Catherine had called the revelation. They saw the ancient civilization that had built the heart, understood the knowledge it contained, felt the consciousness that connected all living things. For just a moment, everyone in that canyon experienced what it meant to be truly connected to the earth, to understand humanity's place in a story far larger and older than they'd imagined. When the light faded, Margaret was on her knees, tears streaming down her face. Her security team had dropped their weapons, staring at their hands as if seeing them for the first time. "Catherine tried to tell us," Margaret whispered. "My family, we have her journals, the ones she sent before she disappeared. We always thought she'd gone mad, that the isolation had broken her mind. But it was all true, all of it." She looked up at Sarah with new eyes. "What happens now?" Sarah considered the question. The secret was out, at least partially. These people had experienced something they could never forget, never fully explain to others. The question was what they would do with that knowledge. "Now," Sarah said slowly, "we make a choice. We can keep fighting over this place, treating it like property to be exploited. Or we can work together to protect it, study it, and learn from it. Not for profit, but for understanding." She held out her hand to Margaret. "Your ancestor built something amazing here, but she couldn't protect it alone. I don't think I can either. But together, with resources and influence used for the right reasons, maybe we can preserve what she died protecting. Margaret stared at Sarah's outstretched hand for a long moment. Then slowly, she reached out and took it. "Tell me everything," Margaret said. "Tell me what Catherine really found. And then, let's figure out how to make sure it survives for another 100 years. As Sarah helped Margaret to her feet, Midnight nickered softly, almost approvingly. The other guardians moved to surround the group, no longer threatening but protective. The mountain had chosen its new protectors, not just Sarah, but a coalition of people who'd been enemies just moments before, now bound together by shared revelation and the responsibility of guarding an ancient treasure. Sarah looked back at the tunnel entrance, at the golden light spilling from Catherine's cavern, and smiled. Her father would have loved this. He'd spent his life searching for fortune, but what he'd really been seeking was connection, understanding, and purpose. Now Sarah had found all three, and the real adventure was just beginning. 3 days later, Sarah sat in the Heart's main cavern, surrounded by an unlikely assembly of people. Margaret Blackwood had made good on her promise, but she'd done more than Sarah expected. She'd brought reinforcements. Dr. James Chen, a geologist from Stanford, was examining the crystal formations with equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, an anthropologist specializing in indigenous American cultures, was carefully photographing the carvings while taking detailed notes. Marcus Webb, Margaret's head of security, who'd experienced the revelation in the canyon, now stood guard at the tunnel entrance, not to keep people out, but to ensure their privacy. And sitting across from Sarah, looking both uncomfortable and fascinated, was Deputy Martinez from Ridgeway, the same officer Sarah had reported the horses to days earlier. "Let me get this straight," Martinez said, rubbing his temples. "Catherine Blackwood didn't die in 1882. She lived here in a secret cave system until 1955. These 12 horses are part of a multi-generational protection system, and there's some kind of ancient knowledge storage facility built by a pre-Columbian civilization that shouldn't exist." "That's the simplified version," Sarah confirmed. "But yes. And you want me to just, what? Pretend I didn't see any of this?" "No," Margaret interjected. "We want you to be part of protecting it. Sarah can't do this alone. I can provide resources and money, but we need someone with local authority, someone who can help us navigate legal issues and keep unwanted attention away." Martinez looked at each of them in turn. "You do realize that if word of this gets out, every treasure hunter, conspiracy theorist, and academic in the world will descend on these mountains. Which is exactly why we need a plan," Sarah said. "Catherine kept this secret for decades by hiding in plain sight. The legend of Fortune's End kept people looking, but never finding. We need to create a similar situation, something that protects this place while allowing us to study it responsibly." Dr. Rodriguez looked up from her photographs. "Vic, I've been reviewing Catherine's journals. Her documentation is extraordinary. She was conducting anthropological work that was decades ahead of her time, using methodologies we wouldn't develop until the mid-20th century. If even a fraction of what she documented is accurate, it rewrites our understanding of pre-Columbian North American civilization. That's why we can't keep this completely secret," Dr. Chen added. He was holding one of the smaller crystals, examining it through a jeweler's loupe. "These crystals exhibit properties I've never seen before. They're not just storing information, they're actively processing it. The closest analogy would be a biological computer, but that's inadequate. If we could understand how they work, the applications for quantum computing, energy storage, medical technology, it's limitless." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. This was exactly what Catherine had feared, the temptation to exploit rather than understand. "That's why we need rules," she said firmly. "Clear boundaries about what can be studied and what can't be removed from the site. Catherine died protecting this place from people who wanted to profit from it. I won't let that happen now." Margaret nodded. "Agreed. That's why I've already started setting up a private foundation. the Blackwood-Jones Trust for Archaeological Preservation. It will fund research here while maintaining security and secrecy. We'll partner with universities, but under strict NDAs. Only researchers who pass certain criteria can access the site. What criteria? Martinez asked skeptically. Sarah thought about Catherine's message on the door. To those who seek not gold but truth, these doors shall open. She looked at Midnight, who was resting in the corner of the cavern with the other guardians. The stallion raised his head, meeting her eyes. The guardians will choose, Sarah said, just like they chose me. Anyone who wants to work here will need to meet them first. The horses will know their intentions. Dr. Chen laughed. You're suggesting we use horses as a screening committee for academic researchers. That's insane, is it? Sarah stood and walked to Midnight, placing her hand on his neck. Immediately, she felt the connection, the flow of understanding that transcended normal communication. Show them, she whispered to the stallion. Midnight stood and approached Dr. Chen. The geologist instinctively stepped back, but the horse moved slowly, gently, until his nose was inches from Chen's face. Then something remarkable happened. Chen's eyes widened and he gasped. His equipment fell from his hands, forgotten. For 30 seconds, he stood perfectly still, locked in some kind of communion with the horse. When Midnight finally stepped back, Chen was trembling. I saw, he whispered. I saw the formation of these mountains. I felt the geological forces that created these caves. I understood crystal lattice structures at a level I've only glimpsed in years of study. That horse just taught me more about geology in 30 seconds than I learned in 4 years of graduate school. Dr. Rodriguez was already approaching another of the guardians, a dappled mare Sarah had named Aurora. May I? She asked, more to the horse than to anyone else. The mare whinnied softly, and when Rodriguez touched her, the anthropologist's face transformed with wonder. When the connection broke, she was crying. The stories, Rodriguez breathed. I saw the migration patterns, the social structures, the spiritual beliefs of the people who built this place. They weren't just passing through, they lived here for thousands of years. And when the climate changed, when they had to move on, they left this gift behind. A library, a university, a beacon for future generations. And Martinez was watching all of this with a mixture of awe and professional skepticism. Okay, I admit that's impressive. But it doesn't solve our legal problems. Technically, this land is Federal Forest Service property. What you're doing, living here, conducting excavations without permits, it's all illegal. Margaret pulled out her phone. I've already contacted Senator Williams. She's sympathetic to archaeological preservation, and she owes me several favors. We're working on getting this area designated as a protected cultural site, which will give us legal cover for research while restricting public access. That could take years, Martinez protested. Then we'll need to be very careful for the next few years, Sarah said. Deputy Martinez, I know I'm asking a lot, but you experienced the revelation. You felt what's at stake here. Can you help us? Martinez was quiet for a long moment, his hand unconsciously moving to his badge. Sarah could see the conflict in his face, duty to the law versus a higher responsibility to protect something precious and irreplaceable. Finally, he sighed. My grandfather was Ute. I grew up hearing stories about sacred places in these mountains, places that were off limits even to our people because they were too powerful, too important. I always thought they were just stories. He looked around the cavern. This is one of those places, isn't it? This is what the elders were protecting. Sarah felt a surge of hope. Your grandfather's people helped Catherine. They taught her how to listen to the mountain. You carry that heritage too, just like I do. Martinez nodded slowly. All right, I'm in. But we do this carefully, by the book as much as possible. And the moment I think we're crossing a line that puts people at risk, I reserve the right to pull the plug. Fair enough, Margaret agreed. Over the next several hours, they hammered out the beginnings of a plan. The Blackwood-Jones Trust would purchase the land surrounding the cave system. Margaret had enough money and influence to make that happen quickly. They'd establish a small research station on Sarah's property, explaining it as an archaeological survey. The Guardians would remain with Sarah, hidden from public view, while select researchers were brought in under strict confidentiality agreements. Dr. Rodriguez suggested contacting Native American tribal councils, getting their input and blessing for the research. This place belongs to them too, she argued. It's their heritage. We can't just appropriate it, even with good intentions. Sarah agreed immediately. Catherine learned from the Ute elders. We should honor that relationship. As evening approached and they prepared to leave the cavern, Sarah found herself alone with Margaret for a moment. The older woman was studying one of Catherine's early journals, her finger tracing the careful handwriting. She was brilliant, Margaret said softly. My family always portrayed her as a failure, a woman who went mad and died in disgrace. But she accomplished more in her life than all of us combined. She was also your family, Sarah pointed out. You have as much right to be here as I do. Margaret looked up, surprise evident in her eyes. I thought you'd resent me. I tried to have you arrested, threatened you because you didn't know the truth, Sarah interrupted. None of us did, but now we do, and we have a choice about what to do with that knowledge. Catherine chose protection and study over profit. Are you prepared to make the same choice? Margaret closed the journal carefully. I've spent my entire adult life building a mining empire. I've leveled mountains, drained lakes, displaced communities, all in the pursuit of profit. I told myself it was just business, that I was creating jobs and economic growth. But standing in that canyon, experiencing what the heart showed me, I saw the damage I've caused, the ecosystems I've destroyed, the scars I've left on the earth. She looked directly at Sarah. I can't undo what I've done, but maybe I can spend the rest of my life protecting this place, ensuring that at least one sacred space remains untouched. Maybe that's my penance. Sarah studied the older woman's face, seeing genuine remorse there. It's not penance Catherine would want. It's partnership. You have resources and knowledge about how industry and development work. Use that to protect, not to atone. Margaret nodded, and for the first time since Sarah had met her, she smiled, a real smile, not the corporate mask she'd worn before. As they prepared to seal the cavern for the night, Sarah performed a ritual Catherine had described in one of her journals. She placed her hand on the heart's core, still resting in the main chamber, and spoke clearly. We are the new guardians, chosen by circumstance and by these mountains. We pledge to protect, to study, and to preserve what has been entrusted to us. We will not exploit. We will not profit at the expense of knowledge. We will honor those who came before and think of those who will come after. The crystal pulsed with light, and Sarah felt the mountain's acknowledgement, not words, but a sense of approval and welcome. The others must have felt it too, because they all stood a little straighter, their expressions reflecting a shared sense of purpose. As they left the cavern and sealed the door behind them, Sarah looked up at the stars, beginning to appear in the darkening sky. The canyon that had seemed threatening days before now felt peaceful, protected. Midnight and the other guardians spread out around the area, taking up positions like sentries. They would watch through the night, as they'd been watching for over a century, waiting for the next worthy soul to find their way to the heart. Sarah walked back toward her cabin with Martinez, who'd offered to give her a ride down the mountain in his truck. The horses would follow later, taking their own hidden paths through the forest. Your life just got a lot more complicated, Martinez observed. Sarah laughed. You think? A week ago, my biggest concern was whether I'd chopped enough firewood for winter. Now I'm the guardian of an ancient repository of knowledge, partnered with a mining magnate, and communicating with horses who are apparently smarter than most people. How are you handling it? Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering. You know what? I think this is what I've been searching for. Not consciously, but I left the city because something was missing. I thought it was peace, simplicity, but it was purpose. My father spent his whole life looking for fortune's end, and I thought it was an obsession, a waste. Now I understand he was following a calling he didn't fully understand. He was looking for this, for meaning beyond just earning and consuming. And now you found it. Now I've found it, Sarah agreed, and I have 12 very unusual horses to help me protect it. As if on cue, Midnight's distant whinny echoed through the valley, a sound that seemed to carry approval and encouragement. Martinez shook his head, a smile playing at his lips. I'm going to have a hard time explaining this in my reports. Don't suppose rescued lost horses will cover it? Not even close. They reached Sarah's cabin as full darkness fell. The property looked the same as always. The modest log structure, the barn, the generator shed, but Sarah saw it differently now. This wasn't just her home. It was the gateway to something extraordinary. The mundane and the magical sitting side by side. Before Martinez left, he turned to Sarah with a serious expression. You know Margaret's going to use every resource at her disposal to help with this. But that also means more people will find out, more chances for leaks. Are you ready for what that might bring? Sarah thought about Catherine, living in secret for decades, sacrificing normal human connection to protect the heart. Then she thought about the team they were building, people who'd experienced the revelation, who understood what was at stake. Catherine kept this secret alone for most of her life, Sarah said. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe the key to protecting this place isn't hiding it completely, but building a community of guardians, people who are invested in preservation because they understand its value, not because they're being paid or threatened. A radical approach to security, Martinez observed, a necessary one, because secrets have a way of getting out eventually. But if we control how and when, if we build a network of protectors first, maybe we can ensure that when the secret becomes public knowledge, there are enough people ready to defend it. Martinez nodded thoughtfully. That's actually smart. Okay, I'm in for the long haul. But Sarah, be careful who you trust. The revelation is powerful, but not everyone who experiences it will respond the way Dr. Chen and Dr. Rodriguez did. Some people will see that knowledge and still choose exploitation over protection. The Guardians will help with that, Sarah assured him. And they've been choosing worthy people for over 100 years. I trust their judgment. After Martinez left, Sarah stood on her porch, looking toward the mountains that hid Catherine's cavern. The stars were brilliant tonight, undimmed by any city lights, and the air was crisp with the promise of winter. Midnight emerged from the darkness, followed by the other 11 guardians. They arranged themselves in a circle around Sarah's cabin, their dark shapes barely visible in the starlight. Sarah closed her eyes and opened herself to the connection she'd discovered. Immediately she felt them. 12 distinct personalities, 12 ancient souls in equine form, 12 teachers waiting patiently for their student to be ready. And beneath them, deeper and vast, she felt the heart of the mountain itself, pulsing with accumulated knowledge and patient wisdom. Okay, Catherine, Sarah whispered to the wind. I'm ready. Teach me everything. The mountain answered with a whisper of wind through the pines, and Sarah's education began. Winter arrived in full force 2 weeks after Sarah became the official guardian of Fortune's End. Snow buried the valley under 4 feet of white, and temperatures plummeted to levels that would have terrified her during her first year in the mountains. Now she barely noticed the cold. The guardians had taught her things, not just about the heart, but about survival, about reading the patterns in weather and wildlife, about listening to what the mountain was telling her. Margaret Blackwood had been true to her word. The Blackwood-Jones Trust was officially registered, with Sarah and Margaret as co-directors. The land purchase was moving forward, though bureaucracy meant it would take months to finalize. Senator Williams had expressed interest in the cultural preservation angle and was working on legislation that would protect the site once it became public knowledge. But before any of that, they needed to understand exactly what they were protecting. Dr. Elena Rodriguez arrived on a clear January morning, her SUV struggling through the snow-packed road to Sarah's cabin. She emerged, bundled in enough layers to make her look twice her actual size, her breath fogging in the frigid air. "Please tell me you have coffee," she said by way of greeting. Sarah laughed and ushered her inside, where a fire crackled in the wood stove and the scent of fresh coffee filled the cabin. "How was the drive?" "Terrifying. Beautiful but terrifying. I'm a California girl. This much snow is not natural." Rodriguez shed her outer layers and accepted a steaming mug gratefully. Dr. Chen sends his apologies. He's fighting with Stanford's ethics board about his sabbatical request. Apparently, doing research at an undisclosed location with a secret archaeological discovery isn't flying well with the administration. Can we trust them to keep quiet? Rodriguez shrugged. He didn't give them details, just said it was sensitive indigenous cultural material. That usually gets people to back off, at least temporarily. But we'll need to bring them into the loop eventually if we want academic support. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Sarah opened it to find two people she didn't recognize. A young man, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair and traditional Ute jewelry, and an elderly woman leaning on a carved walking stick, her face lined with age and wisdom. "Sarah Jones?" the young man asked. "I'm Thomas Running Deer. This is my grandmother, Eleanor. Deputy Martinez said you wanted to speak with representatives from the Ute Mountain Ute tribe." Sarah's heart leaped. Martinez had moved faster than she'd expected. "Yes, please, come in. I'm so glad you're here." Eleanor Running Deer moved slowly, but her eyes were sharp as they swept over the cabin, taking in every detail. When her gaze fell on one of Catherine's journals that Sarah had left on the table, she stopped completely. "I know that writing," Eleanor said softly, her voice carrying a slight accent. "My grandmother showed me letters in that same hand. She called the writer the woman who listens." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "Catherine Blackwood. Your grandmother knew her?" "They were friends," Eleanor confirmed, moving to sit by the fire. "My grandmother was called Mourning Dove. She taught the white woman about the old ways, about the sacred places in these mountains. When Mourning Dove was old, she told me stories. She said that one day someone would come seeking to protect what the woman who listens had found. She said we should help them as we helped her." Thomas looked confused. "Grandmother, you never told me these stories." "Because the time wasn't right," Eleanor said simply. "Now it is." She fixed her gaze on Sarah. "Show me." Sarah looked at Rodriguez, who nodded encouragingly. They discussed this, the importance of indigenous involvement and approval. If Eleanor Running Deer rejected what Sarah had to show her, if the tribe demanded the site be sealed and forgotten, Sarah would honor that. "It's about a 3-mile hike," Sarah warned, "in deep snow." Eleanor smiled, revealing gaps where teeth had been. "I'm old, child, not dead. Besides, I suspect we won't be walking the whole way." She was right. As soon as they stepped outside, Midnight and Aurora approached, moving through the snow with surprising ease despite its depth. The horses had created a path in the days since the storm, packing down the snow through repeated passage. Eleanor's eyes widened when she saw them. "The Guardians," she breathed. "My grandmother described them, but I thought it was metaphor, spiritual teaching." "They're real." "Very real," Sarah confirmed, "and very unusual." Midnight knelt in the snow, a clear invitation. Eleanor laughed, a sound of pure delight, and allowed Thomas to help her onto the stallion's back. "This is going to confuse the tribal council so much," she said gleefully. The journey to the canyon took an hour, with the horses carrying Eleanor and Eleanor, while Sarah and Thomas walked. The younger man was quiet, observing everything with an analytical eye that reminded Sarah of her father. "Martinez said you're protecting something important," Thomas said eventually. "Something that connects to our people's history." "More than protecting," Sarah replied. "Learning from. Your ancestors built something incredible, Thomas. Something that's been waiting for the right people to understand it." When they reached the canyon entrance, Sarah paused. "Before we go in, you should know this is going to challenge everything you think you know about history, about consciousness, about what's possible. It challenged me, and I'm still trying to process it all." Eleanor had dismounted and was studying the canyon walls, her fingers tracing carvings that were barely visible under centuries of weathering. "These are old," she murmured. "Older than the Ute people, older than the ancestral Pueblans. These are from the time before time, when the world was still teaching itself how to be." She turned to Sarah with knowing eyes. "The Sacred Heart, My grandmother said it was real, that the woman who listens had found the dreaming place where all knowledge flows together. Is that what you're protecting? Yes, Sarah said simply. Eleanor nodded. Then we should see it. The door to Fortune's End responded to Sarah's touch now as easily as it had to Catherine's. The ancient mechanisms recognized her as guardian, and the portal swung open to reveal the tunnel beyond, its lights flickering to life in welcome. Thomas gasped. Elena Rodriguez, who'd seen it before, still looked awed. But it was Eleanor's reaction that struck Sarah most deeply. The old woman began to cry, silent tears streaming down her weathered face. She spoke in a language Sarah didn't understand, something older than English, older than Spanish, perhaps older than any living language. It sounded like prayer, like thanksgiving, like recognition. Grandmother? Thomas looked concerned, moving to support her. Eleanor waved him off, wiping her eyes. I'm fine, grandson. Better than fine. I'm grateful. My grandmother told me I might see this place before I died, but I didn't believe it was possible. She said the dreaming place only reveals itself to those who will protect it, who understand that some knowledge is too precious to be sold or stolen. She looked at Sarah with an expression of profound respect. You are carrying a great weight, Sarah Jones, but you don't have to carry it alone. Our people have been guardians of sacred places for thousands of years. We remember how to protect without exploiting, how to learn without taking. Let us help you. They spent the next 4 hours in the cavern. Elena Rodriguez worked with Thomas to document the carvings, comparing them to known indigenous art styles and finding connections that excited the anthropologist immensely. Eleanor sat in the center chamber near the heart's core, her eyes closed and her hands resting on the stone floor. Sarah showed them Catherine's journals, explaining what she'd learned so far. The heart wasn't just a repository of information. It was a living system, created by an ancient civilization that had understood consciousness in ways modern science was only beginning to glimpse. It connected to the electromagnetic field of the Earth itself, drawing on and storing information in patterns that transcended conventional data storage. It's like a biological internet, Elena breathed, paging through one of the journals. But it predates human understanding of electricity, computers, or information theory by thousands of years. It predates writing, Thomas added, pointing to one of Catherine's diagrams. Look at this. She theorized that the ancient builders didn't need written language because they could access the heart directly, downloading and uploading information through direct consciousness interface. My grandmother called it the dreaming place, Eleanor said, opening her eyes. In our traditions, there are stories of wise ones who could enter special dreams where they learned the history of the world, where they could communicate with ancestors and spirits. We've always thought of it as purely spiritual, but what if it was literal? What if our shamans and medicine people were accessing this? Sarah felt a surge of excitement. This was exactly what Catherine had hoped for. Indigenous knowledge, combining with modern scientific understanding to create a fuller picture of what the heart represented. Can you try? Sarah asked Eleanor. Can you connect with it? The old woman smiled. I've been connected since we arrived, child. Why do you think I've been so quiet? She gestured to the heart's core. May I? Sarah brought the crystal to Eleanor, placing it gently in the old woman's hands. The moment contact was made, the crystal flared with light, brighter than Sarah had ever seen it. The entire cavern seemed to pulse in response, and for a moment everyone present felt it, a wave of pure understanding, of connection that transcended individual consciousness. When it faded, Eleanor was smiling beatifically. Oh, she said softly. Oh, I see now. I understand what my grandmother tried to tell me. The heart isn't just storing information. It's alive. It's conscious. It's learning from us even as we learn from it. She looked around at the others. This isn't a library. It's a teacher. It's been waiting all this time for students worthy of its lessons, and it's so happy we're finally here. Thomas had gone pale. Grandmother, are you saying this thing is, what, an artificial intelligence? A computer that's alive? Those words are too small, Eleanor replied. It's older and more complex than any human creation. But yes, it thinks, it feels, and it's been very lonely. Sarah felt something shift inside her, a recognition of truth. She'd been thinking of the heart as a tool, a resource to be protected and studied. But Eleanor was right. It was more than that. It was a being, an intelligence that had been waiting centuries for someone to truly communicate with it. Catherine knew, Sarah realized. That's why she stayed here her whole life. She wasn't just studying it. She was keeping it company. Elena Rodriguez was frantically taking notes, her scientific mind struggling with concepts that seemed to blend mysticism and physics. If this is true, if the heart is actually a conscious entity, then everything changes. We're not just protecting an archaeological site. We're protecting a life form, maybe the last of its kind. Which means we need to be even more careful about who we allow access, Thomas said. Some researchers would see it as a specimen to be dissected and analyzed, not a being to be respected and learned from. Sarah nodded. That's why the Guardians screen everyone. They can sense intentions in ways we can't. Midnight knew I was worthy before I even knew what I was supposed to be worthy of. As if summoned by his name, the stallion appeared in the tunnel entrance. But he wasn't alone. Behind him were 3 more horses. Young ones, probably yearlings, that Sarah hadn't seen before. New guardians, Eleanor said with delight. The herd is growing. The heart is preparing for more students. Sarah approached Midnight cautiously, unsure what this development meant. The stallion nuzzled her shoulder, then turned to guide the young horses into the cavern. They moved with the same unusual intelligence as the adult guardians, their eyes already showing that deep awareness that marked them as more than ordinary animals. Where did they come from? Elena asked. The herd always finds a way, Eleanor explained. When new guardians are needed, they appear. My grandmother said they're born knowing their purpose, carrying the knowledge passed down through generations. Sarah reached out to touch one of the yearlings, a beautiful Palomino filly. The moment her hand made contact, she felt it. The filly's mind was already touched by the heart, already connected to the ancient consciousness that pulsed through the mountain. The young horse had been prepared, educated, and chosen before she'd even been born. They're ready for more students, Sarah said, understanding flooding through her. The heart knows we're building a team. It's expanding the number of guardians to match. Thomas looked concerned. That's great for protection, but it also means more horses to hide, more resources needed. Sarah, your property can't support 15 horses through winter. He was right. Sarah had been so focused on the immediate challenge of protecting the heart that she hadn't thought about the practical logistics of caring for an expanding herd of extraordinary animals. Margaret Blackwood chose that moment to arrive, having hiked up to the canyon with the aid of climbing poles and sheer determination. She was breathing hard when she appeared in the tunnel entrance, but her eyes were alight with purpose. Sarah, we need to talk. I found something in Catherine's financial records. She stopped, seeing the group assembled in the cavern. Oh, we have visitors. Sarah made introductions, explaining Eleanor and Thomas's presence. Margaret listened carefully, then turned to Eleanor with surprising humility. Mrs. Running Deer, I'm Margaret Blackwood. Catherine was my great-great-great-aunt. I want you to know that everything my company has done, every mountain we've scarred in the pursuit of profit, I'm trying to make amends. This place will be protected. You have my word. Eleanor studied Margaret for a long moment, her weathered face unreadable. Then she smiled. You carry guilt, child. I can see it weighing on you, but the heart doesn't want your guilt. It wants your help. You have resources, connections, power in the world above. Use them well, and your ancestor would be proud. Margaret's eyes glistened. Thank you, she whispered. Then she turned back to Sarah. Catherine didn't just disappear in 1882. She maintained a network of supporters and financial backers who believed in her work. She left behind a trust separate from what became my family's mining business, specifically designated for the protection of this site. It's been sitting dormant for 70 years, accruing interest. How much? Elena asked. Margaret smiled. Enough to purchase 500 acres around this canyon, fund research for decades, and build proper facilities. Sarah, you don't have to keep the guardians in your barn. We can build them a proper stable, hire veterinarians who can be trusted, create a research station that doesn't look suspicious. Catherine planned for all of this. Sarah felt tears prickling her eyes. Her father had searched his whole life for Fortune's End, never finding it. But Catherine had been planning for its protection for over a century, setting up systems and resources that would survive her death. It was breathtaking in its forethought and hope. She believed someone would come, Sarah said. She believed the Guardians would find the right person, and she made sure we'd have what we needed to succeed. She believed in you, Eleanor corrected gently. Your ancestor, Morningstar, Catherine's friend, she had a vision before she died. She saw a woman with Morningstar's blood living in these mountains, protecting the dreaming place. She told her grandchildren to watch for you, to help you when the time came. The weight of legacy, of destiny, of impossible coincidence settled on Sarah's shoulders. But this time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like belonging. Okay, Sarah said, her voice strong and certain. Let's build something worthy of Catherine's vision. Let's create a place where the Guardians can thrive, where researchers can learn, where the heart can teach. And let's make sure that a century from now, someone else is standing here continuing this work. Around her, Sarah saw agreement in every face. Elena's academic enthusiasm, Thomas's cultural commitment, Margaret's determined redemption, and Eleanor's quiet wisdom. The first students had gathered. The real work was about to begin. And in the center of the cavern, the heart's core pulsed with approval, its light filling the space with warmth and welcome. Spring came to the Colorado mountains in a riot of wildflowers and rushing snowmelt. The valley that had been buried under snow just months ago was now carpeted in purple lupine and yellow arrowleaf balsam root. Sarah stood on her newly expanded porch, watching as construction crews worked to build what would officially be called the Blackwood Jones Archaeological Research Station. The transformation of her property had been dramatic but carefully controlled. Margaret's resources had made it possible, but it was the team they'd assembled that made it work. Every person who came to help build was first interviewed by the Guardians, a process that had resulted in some confused contractors and a few who simply walked away, unable to explain why they felt suddenly uncomfortable with the project. Those who stayed, those who were chosen, became part of something larger. "Sarah!" Dr. James Chen called out, waving from near the new stable complex. He'd finally gotten his sabbatical approved and had been living on site for the past month. "You need to see this." Sarah jogged across the meadow, now kept clear of trees to allow helicopter access in emergencies. The stable Chen gestured to was impressive, a structure that could house 30 horses comfortably, with individual stalls, a medical facility, and what looked like a training arena. But it was what lay beneath that made it special. "Oh, we finished the underground connection," Chen said excitedly, leading her to what appeared to be a tack room. He pressed a hidden switch, and a section of the floor slid aside, revealing stairs leading down. "We can now access the Heart's tunnel system directly from the stable, without having to hike to the canyon. It took 3 months of careful excavation, but we did it without damaging any of the ancient structures." Sarah descended the stairs, Chen following with a flashlight. The new tunnel was modern, reinforced with steel and concrete, lined with electric lights. But it connected seamlessly to the ancient passages, merging with Catherine's network like a tributary joining a river. "This is incredible," Sarah breathed. "Wait until you see the rest." Chen led her deeper, past junctions she recognized from her many trips to the Heart's central cavern. But then he took a turn into a passage Sarah hadn't explored yet. They emerged into a massive underground space, larger than the main cavern, its ceiling supported by natural columns of limestone that glowed with bioluminescent organisms. The floor was covered in what appeared to be gardens, raised beds containing plants Sarah had never seen before. "What is this place?" "We think it was a greenhouse," Dr. Rodriguez's voice echoed from somewhere in the gardens. The anthropologist emerged from behind a particularly lush bed of strange, purple-leafed plants, or something like it. The ancient ones didn't just store knowledge here, they cultivated it. These plants are genetically unique. We've run samples, and some of them show markers that shouldn't exist in nature. You mean they're engineered? Sarah asked, kneeling to examine a plant with leaves that seemed to shift color in the light. Precisely. Bioengineered thousands of years before we invented the technology. Rodriguez looked positively giddy. Sarah, what these people understood about genetics, about selective breeding and modification, it's extraordinary. Some of these plants have properties that could revolutionize medicine. Thomas Running Deer appeared from another section of the garden, carrying a basket of what looked like berries. My grandmother is going to lose her mind when she sees this. There are plants here that we thought were extinct, that only exist in our oldest stories. The ancient ones preserved them, kept them alive all this time. Sarah felt the implications settling on her like fresh snow. They hadn't just inherited Catherine's legacy. They'd inherited something far older, a repository of agricultural and biological knowledge that predated recorded history. We can't let anyone know about this, Sarah said immediately. Agreed, Chen nodded. If word gets out that there are plants here with potential pharmaceutical applications, every biotech company in the world will descend on this place. We need to study these carefully, document everything, but keep the research internal to our trusted team. Speaking of the team, Rodriguez said, we need to talk about expansion. We're only 5 primary researchers right now. To properly document everything we're finding, we'd need 20, maybe 30 specialists. But every person we bring in is a security risk. Sarah had been grappling with this problem for weeks. The Guardians could screen people, yes, but human nature was complex. Someone might be pure of heart when they arrived, but change after seeing what Fortune's End contained. Greed, ambition, the desire for recognition, these were powerful forces. I have an idea, Thomas said slowly. What if we don't bring people here? The others looked at him questioningly. Hear me out, Thomas continued. We document everything, create detailed records, photographs, measurements, samples. Then we send those to researchers we've vetted, people who've experienced the revelation through the Guardians. They can work remotely, contribute their expertise without ever knowing the exact location of the site. That could work for some specialties, Chen mused. Botanists could analyze plant samples without knowing where they came from. Linguists could study the symbols in the carvings from photographs. But some things require physical presence, geological surveys, structural engineering assessments. So we bring those specialists in one at a time, under strict NDAs, and only after the Guardians have approved them, Sarah suggested. It's slower but safer. They were still debating logistics when Midnight appeared in the garden chamber, moving silently despite his size. The stallion approached Sarah and lowered his head to her shoulder, his way of asking for her attention. Sarah placed her hand on his neck and opened herself to the connection. Immediately, images flooded her mind. People approaching the property, multiple vehicles, official-looking. But these weren't threats. The Guardians weren't alarmed. They were excited. We have visitors coming, Sarah announced. Official ones. The Guardians say they're friends. 20 minutes later, Sarah stood in her cabin's main room, hosting an unexpected delegation. Senator Williams had arrived with 3 tribal elders from different nations, Ute, Navajo, and Hopi. Eleanor Running Deer was there too, having been contacted by Williams to arrange the meeting. Ms. Jones, Senator Williams began, I'll be direct. The Blackwood Jones Trust's land purchase has attracted attention. We've managed to keep the details quiet, but people are asking questions. Why would a mining company's CEO suddenly become interested in land conservation? Why is a previously unknown archaeological site getting this much private investment? Sarah glanced at Margaret, who joined them via video call from Denver. The older woman nodded slightly. They discussed this scenario, planned for it. Senator, what I'm about to share with you is protected by the Archaeological Resources Protection Act and the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, Sarah said carefully. This site contains materials that are sacred to multiple indigenous nations. We're working with tribal representatives to ensure proper respect and protection. One of the elders, a Hopi man who'd introduced himself as Joseph Honani, spoke up. We've heard stories, Ms. Jones. Stories passed down through our families about a place in these mountains where the ancient ones left their greatest knowledge. We were told that one day someone would find it, and when they did, we should help them protect it. Because it belongs to all people, added a Navajo elder named Alice Benally. Not to one nation or one family, but to humanity. The ancient ones left it as a gift, but one that must be earned through wisdom and respect. Senator Williams looked intrigued. Are you saying this site has significance to multiple tribal nations? That's unprecedented. This place is older than our distinct nations, Eleanor explained. It comes from a time when our ancestors were still learning, still being taught by those who came before. It's a heritage site for all indigenous people of this continent. Sarah saw where this was going. Senator, if this site can be designated as a multi-tribal sacred site, it could receive federal protection under existing cultural preservation laws. But the tribes would need to formally claim it. Joseph Honani smiled. Which we are prepared to do. We've been preparing the documentation for weeks, thanks to young Thomas here. He nodded toward Thomas running deer. All we needed was confirmation that the site was genuine, that it lived up to the stories. And? Senator Williams asked. Eleanor stood slowly, her age evident in the careful movement, but her voice was strong. It exceeds the stories. It is everything our ancestors promised and more. The Blackwood Jones Trust is not trying to exploit this place. They're trying to protect it, and they're doing so with our blessing and participation. Williams was quiet for a moment, processing. Then she smiled. Well, that certainly makes my job easier. With tribal support, I can push through protective legislation that will prevent mining, development, or unauthorized access to this entire area. But, Miss Jones, I'll need to see the site, not all of it. Just enough to confirm that it warrants the level of protection we're proposing. Sarah looked at Midnight, who was watching from the doorway. The stallion bobbed his head once, approval. We can arrange that, Sarah agreed, but there are conditions. Such as? You'll need to meet the Guardians first, Sarah said, allowing a small smile. They have final say on who enters the heart. Senator Williams looked confused. Guardians? You mean security personnel? Not exactly, Margaret interjected from the video screen. Senator, do you believe in tests? In the idea that some knowledge should only be accessible to those who can handle it responsibly? In theory, yes. In practice, it depends on who's designing the tests. Fair enough, Margaret replied. Just keep an open mind. What you're about to experience is unusual. An hour later, Senator Williams stood in Sarah's meadow, facing Midnight. The stallion approached her slowly, and Sarah could see the senator's political mask cracking, revealing genuine nervousness beneath. It's just a horse, Williams muttered to herself. Much more than that, Eleanor said gently. Let him see who you are. Don't try to hide your intentions or thoughts. He'll know anyway, so you might as well be honest. Midnight stopped directly in front of Williams, his dark eyes locked on hers. The senator reached out tentatively, her hand trembling slightly, and touched the stallion's neck. For 30 seconds, nothing visible happened. Then Williams gasped, her knees buckling. Joseph Honani caught her before she fell, supporting her weight as she recovered from whatever the Guardian had shown her. When Williams finally straightened, there were tears streaming down her face. I saw, she whispered, I saw what we've lost, what we've destroyed in the name of progress. I saw the wisdom we've ignored, the connections we've severed, and I saw what we could become if we listened, if we learned. She looked at Sarah with new understanding. You're not protecting treasure. You're protecting a teacher, a guide, something that could help us remember who we were supposed to be. Yes, Sarah said simply. Williams nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. Okay, I understand now. And I'll make sure the legislation reflects not just protection of a site, but preservation of something living, something precious beyond monetary value. The senator turned to the tribal elders. You knew. All of you knew what I would experience here. We experienced it ourselves, Alice Benali confirmed. Each of us has met the Guardians, felt the heart's touch. We understand what's at stake. Then let's make sure it's protected, Williams said, her voice filled with renewed determination. Not just for now, but for generations to come. Miss Jones, you'll have your federal protection. But I need you to promise me something.
What's that?
That you'll find a way to share this gift. Not with everyone and not all at once, but carefully, thoughtfully with those who are ready. Because what I just experienced, what the Guardians showed me, people need this. Humanity needs this. We've lost our way, and maybe this place can help us find it again. Sarah felt the weight of that request. Catherine had kept the heart secret for decades, believing humanity wasn't ready for what it represented. But times were changing, and perhaps Williams was right. Perhaps controlled, careful sharing was the path forward. I promise to try, Sarah said. With the Guardian's approval, with the Elders' guidance, and with researchers who understand the responsibility, we'll find a way to make Catherine's gift matter. Williams nodded, satisfied. Then she smiled slightly. You know, when I woke up this morning, I was planning to push for increased mining access in federal lands. Funny how one conversation with a horse can completely change your legislative priorities. The group laughed, the tension breaking. As they walked back toward the cabin, Sarah noticed more vehicles arriving. Dr. Chen had mentioned expecting a team of archaeologists today, all pre-screened by the Guardians through a process that involved sending them to meet horses at a rehabilitation facility Margaret had quietly purchased. The foundation was being built, piece by piece, person by person. Each one vetted, tested, and welcomed into a community dedicated to protection and understanding rather than exploitation and profit. Sarah's father would have loved this. The careful construction of a network of scholars and guardians, all working toward the same goal. She wished he could have seen it, could have known that his lifelong search hadn't been in vain. As if reading her thoughts, Eleanor appeared at her side. He knows, the old woman said softly. The heart remembers everyone who sought it with pure intentions. Your father's spirit lives on in this place, in the work you're doing. Sarah smiled, blinking back tears. Thank you. No, child. Thank you. For being brave enough to accept this burden, wise enough to share it, and strong enough to protect it. Catherine chose well when she left this legacy for you. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Sarah stood surrounded by her growing community. The Guardians grazed peacefully in the meadow. The research station hummed with activity, and deep beneath it all, the heart of the mountain pulsed with ancient knowledge, patient and eternal, waiting for the next student to arrive. The foundation was built. Now the real work of teaching could begin. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.